I mean, we all get anxious about different things. I get anxious around tax season. This topic is about anxiety, and it is a spectrum of behaviors and thoughts and feelings. And it even is been labeled, with different disorders and all of that. But I want to down tempo the sense of, well, basically the sense of shame around anything to do with our mental emotional health, because it's so easy to just think, oh, I've gained a couple of pounds, or I rolled my ankle, or something physical. We don't mind talking about so much to other people, but when it comes to our mental emotional health, it still has stigma and it still has weight socially for us. And I would like to kind of let that drop away this evening and just put it on the table right now that there's probably not there isn't a single person in the world who's never had anxious thoughts. Anxious thoughts and feelings are actually a tool that helps us when we're in a survival situation. When we're thinking forward about something looming in front of us, it could be a spider on the floor, or it could be about tax season, or it could be about having to travel in a plane. It could be about things to do with COVID right now. Whenever we've got some fear-driven thoughts or emotions, that is healthy. That's the sympathetic nervous system engaging in preparing different aspects of the brain, like our memory center, our fear center, and sending neurotransmitter information between them to make sure that we do the right thing based on historical information that we've stored in our memory bank. Now, the only time when this becomes a problem is when it's more persistent. If it's ongoing day to day, or if it's after a traumatic event and it's so intense it's disrupting our sleep or affecting our relationships or our ability to hold down a job, that's when that interior mechanism for safety is in overdrive. And when it's in overdrive, it can lead to all kinds of troubles for us. And so I just want to debunk that it's a psychological problem. I want to tell you that it's an inherent safety mechanism that we all have, and we all have it triggered in different ways because we're unique human beings. And the spectrum of anxiousness can run from general worry and concern that can kind of bubble up daily, and it can move into things where we have phobias, where, like I said, a spider or fear of flying, and those things can kind of limit our choice points or make us too wary and maybe hypervigilant. It can also lead to a general sense of dread where we're afraid of public exposure, like maybe having to do a public talk, or going to a social situation where you don't know people and you're a little bit shy and concerned about how you're going to come off. These are all a spectrum, again, from natural to more increasingly disabling situations where we might even stop going out socially because we're worried about how we're going to be perceived by others. Panic attacks, I don't know if you've ever witnessed that with people, but it can come on with just the slightest thing. It can be a memory that pops up. It can be an event that triggers a memory. It could be a thought or a feeling, and somebody can go into almost what seems like a heart attack. Sweating, pale skin, heart palpitations, and contraction in the chest, severe nausea, and it can last for up to an hour, half an hour to an hour. And that can happen to any of us.
Seen that happen with someone being claustrophobic, and they weren't claustrophobic, but they got in a situation. It was on a ski trip, and we crammed all of us plus a bunch of gear into a car, and they were the ones that drew the short straw by being in the back with all the bags.
Right.
And just being in the back of a car, out of control, not being able to see out of the windows, and in this closed environment, they started to have a panic attack.
Mm-hmm. and that it's completely uncontrollable until
Yeah.
somebody else helps them through techniques that we'll talk about in a minute, but even just basic breathing techniques to help somebody pull themselves back out of that sympathetic nervous system drive, back into a parasympathetic nervous state. Obsessive compulsive behaviors, we all have them. We might count in our mind about things. We might order things on our desk in a particular way. We might only order the same things at our favorite cafe whenever we go there. There's all kinds of behaviors that we do that could be seen as obsessive compulsive. But when any of these things become what's called a disorder, is when they're lasting for a continuous period of time and they're limiting our life. That's the qualifier. All of these things I've just spectrumed for you can happen to any of us at random times. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're going crazy. But if it's happening continuously and it's starting to limit your life, then it's moving into what scientists call a disorder. And so then there's a series of things that we can do to help cope with that. Lastly, acute anxiety, often coming from something like post-traumatic stress events, can be quite crippling. It can lead us into super vigilant state and can disrupt sleep and all kinds of things. Those are from very traumatic things. It could be as simple as a car accident. Now, let me tell you another thing, that every one of us on the Zoom screen right now, if we were all in a bus together and the bus crashed, not all of us would react in the same way. Every one of us reacts to stress and trauma in completely different ways. And it comes from a variety of different reasons, but basically boiled down to two. One is genetic. Some of us are predisposed through family history and different genes to have either different neurotransmitter chemistry be more or less, or stress hormone chemistry be more or less, or even different areas of the brain responsible for stress management and fear centers may be grown larger or smaller. This is a genetic predisposition. Now, environment is the next component, and that's basically things that come either from our childhood or something that could happen to us later in our life in a traumatic way. But when we're talking about childhood, we're talking about very early infant-parent bonding. That's called attachment. We're talking about witnessing the loss of a caregiver or the disappearance and having that attachment disappear. And then all the spectrum of abuse, even witnessing other people being abused or being abused ourselves. And then lastly, shame. Shame is a kind of an emotional poison that can drip into a family and totally limit the way our brain develops around how we see each other, or ourselves, how we see ourselves with either having worth or not having worth. And all of those things are happening in the environment of our childhood that then can affect the genes, because environment, now we see the correlation between how we live and our genetic predisposition, and then we can set off something in our neurotransmitter or other hormones, or basically our nervous system connection. And then that can set us up for having any of these different types of anxiousness or depression. Any questions about that, the way it can happen for us? Now if not, don't hesitate to ask. You can always type it in and Alex will bring it up through the chat. So if you feel a little bit shy about asking anything, feel free. Again, qualifiers, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychiatric professional, but I am training to be relational somatic therapist, and I'm also really good at research and pulling things down.
So let me ask a question, Kirk. I'm curious. This is Laura. I'm curious about the difference between it being genetic and predisposed to anxiety, and anxiety and depression being caused by a situation like COVID. Like how I'm wondering if how common that is that you can develop anxiety from a situation like this and really have it be sustainable and affect you.
Yes, it definitely can. Because again, each of us are different, Laura. And if we go back to the bus, we're all in a bus together, the bus crashes. Some of us in the bus are going to immediately jump up and start looking for an escape hatch. The bus is upside down. We're going to figure out what we're going to do with that. Some of us are going to just grab someone next to us and we're just going to hold on and bring our heads down, and we're going to hope things are going to get better. In a way, you could think of the three options: fight, flight, and freeze. We are wired for those choices, and each of us takes a different route when it comes to survival. So in this bus, we're all going to act differently, and we're all going to have a different stressor, like the crash, affect how we're going to be traumatized or not. And in this situation where we're in a pandemic worldwide of a fearful health event that we're getting constrained about socially and mentally and emotionally, some of us are going to have that become a trigger that can cause us to become more anxious or more depressed. Now, anxiety-related difficulties actually take up the majority of all mental and emotional health issues. And depression itself is only half as many cases as anxiety. And typically anyone who has depression, usually half of those people also have anxiety married to it, because it's so much to do with the brain chemistry that when serotonin levels go down, for example, that can affect both anxiety and depression. Or cortisol levels go up, that can put us into a hypervigilant state. Or dopamine levels go up or down. Going up could put us into an obsessive compulsive focus, whereas going down could put us into a socially isolating state. So these neurotransmitters affect each of us differently. So yes, your question is, if COVID and all of its restrictions and the fears and the numbers of deaths and everything that we're seeing and the cases and all of that, that can easily trigger us. And we know hands down, the research is up, that anxiety is going up right now as a general population because of the situation. So again, those are the causes of anxiety. Now let's talk about the effects. Now, in terms of physical effects, any one of those spectrum of anxiousness behaviors and feelings and thoughts could lead to muscle tension, could lead to increased heart rate and heartbeat irregularities, can lead to sleep loss, hands down, can lead to chest pain, sweating, all basically are signs that we're in a fight, flight, and freeze situation. In terms of the mental emotional symptoms or effects, we could have intrusive or distressing thoughts come up either in sleep or during the day. We can also have a racing mind. So the mind is just incessantly just pouring out thoughts, very common with anxiousness. Compulsive thoughts, of course. So we can just fixate on something and compulsively be concerned or worried or triggered by it. And again, compulsive behaviors, worry, fear, anxiousness about almost anything, and hypervigilance. So we're kind of like looking over our shoulders all the time to make sure that we're safe. And then lastly, social withdrawal. Now, all of those mental emotional states can become debilitating for us. And so if you're noticing any of these things right now, especially with COVID, or if COVID's triggering anything for you from childhood, and you're feeling like your world's getting smaller and your mind is getting out of control, then we've got to look at what we can do to remedy the situation. Just like I roll my ankle, I'm going to go see traditional Chinese medicine for some needling to reduce the swelling immediately. I'm going to put arnica ointment on the outside of it to reduce the inflammation. I went to my chiropractor to make sure that all the 26 bones in my ankle are back in line and not subluxed. I went to my physical doctor because it was lasting more than 2 weeks, and I got an x-ray because I was concerned that I'd pulled a ligament and a bone chip off of one part of my ankle. So look how many therapies I went and looked at. just for a rolled ankle. And we need to do this with our mental and emotional health as well. Now, the most common way that we've been managing anxiety and depression has been with basically with medication. And I'm not against medication. All of us have different brain chemistry, and sometimes some of us need a serotonin reuptake so that we get the serotonin staying longer between the neurons in our brain so that we can keep a stable mood. Some of us need antidepressants because we're going down that spiral, and it can take us so deep that we become debilitated. So medications have helped a lot of people. And some medications for different folks have different side effects. And this is something that you have to be personally mindful about, and then decide if you want to try it for a while, which involves a psychotherapist and a doctor, or a doctor, adjusting and titrating the volumes and the amounts and the doses so that you can use it and it can help you. The next field that came along after medications was therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has been the most commonly used. And so cognitive behavioral, it's working both on thoughts and the behavioral choices we have in our life. Most cognitive behavioral therapy involves sort of an exposure, a titrated exposure to either a role playing or memory of trauma, or a phobia, or a fear. And the practitioners helping you come close to the feelings, feel them a little bit, and then pull back away. And so you get, instead of running away from a fear or a phobia or a trauma and just trying to hide your life away from it, you're coming close and you're desensitizing in titrated amounts so that you can handle it more and more. This works really well with post-traumatic stress disorder. Another form of therapy that's been around even longer, going back to Freudian days, is talk therapy. The only problem with insight or talk therapy is that you can just spend a lot of time talking about something and staying way out here rather than coming in and getting in touch with it and feeling it in the body. And then through the body, feeling the affect or the emotions that arise through where the trauma or the event or the fear actually lives in our body, because really there's no separation between the mind and the body. Everything that's in the mind is also in the body. Now, a new form of psychotherapy counseling that has come out is called relational somatic therapy. So it's relating mind and body to trauma or events or attachment in our life. And soma is body. So you'd be noticing what you're feeling in a place in your body, the textures, the intensity, the colors, whatever it is. And you would, through that, find your way through to an event or a fear that's somewhere in your subconscious. And then again, with resourcing through breathing or grounding exercises, getting close to it, and then being able to hold it more. You see, we can't get rid of the fears altogether, or the traumas. What we can do is learn how to hold them larger and live with them. And through mindfulness exercises, learn when they're arising and they're triggering us in our day-to-day life, maybe at work or with our kids or with our relations of any kind of relationships. And then instead of getting completely sucked into a habituated neural pathway, we have other options. So our life can get larger rather than smaller. So medications and therapy are two modalities that can help us. Now I want to also talk about some other alternatives. And the more research I've done, I've gone into Harvard Health Science, and these people do a ton of research and pull all the research up. And they're looking at a lot of interesting things to go along with those other two. And all the research now is saying, if you can do more than one therapy to support anxiety or depression, your success rate goes through the roof. If you can do 2 to 3 and they resonate for you, you can start to pull away into less potentially aggressive forms of therapy. So One of the alternative treatments, of course, is mindfulness. When we're having racing thoughts, when we're having distorted thinking or compulsive thoughts, when we're in constant worry, we're not present. We're caught up in thought, and our mind is just pumping out thoughts continuously. If we take mindfulness practice, meditation, concentration practices, and we start to build a witnessing quality of our mind that catches the mind that wants to generate thoughts, we won't get down the rabbit hole so quickly. We'll notice when we're getting off track, or we'll notice when our heart rate's going up or our stomach's getting nauseous. We'll notice when our breathing is getting shallow. And then we'll go, okay, something's triggering me again. I'm going to come and just go into some breathing. I'm going to stay present with what is. I'm just going to witness it and know that my mind wants to run. Come back to being in this moment. All therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, relational somatic therapy, all of them now are including mindfulness, because it's the way to notice rather than get caught in a habitual loop that's set up in the computer. Yoga.
Interject real quick on mindfulness. So I forget where I heard it, probably a podcast, but once stated that depression is a regret of the past and anxiety is a regret of the future.
Yes.
And I thought that was an interesting way to put it, because it shows how they're so similar and separated by just the difference of past and future. And then also to bring up that both of those are tied to alternate times that aren't the present.
Exactly. And this is what helps people say they're having a panic attack, is bringing them back into their body, into their breath, into the present moment. That's the only way out of it. So if we catch our thoughts going future, fear, past, regret, we know we're not in the present moment. And this is where the practices of breathing techniques, mindfulness exercises, meditation techniques can bring us back out of the busy thought-generating mind into a more still, body-connected mind and be in the present moment. So absolutely correct, Alex.
Yeah, and that was something that we talked about probably during a mindfulness happy hour specifically, was those triggers.
Yes.
Right? So we've mentioned this before, where it's easy to tell someone, we'll just be present. Or specifically with meditation, we'll just focus on the candle or focus on that thing that you're practicing. But even getting to that point, having that initial trigger that makes you even think, oh, I should be doing a breath work. I should be doing a concentration exercise, right? That to me seems like the biggest gap.
That gap is like doing bicep curls or chewing our food more. It comes down to habit.
So it's a practice, something to train.
So that's where 5 minutes a day to sit on your chair or your cushion and just practice concentrating on either the sensation of the breath in your nose, or a mantra if you like that better, or a candle flame, or the sounds of waves, whatever works for you, for 5 minutes, and just be with your mind and notice how incessant it is generating thought. Most of us don't even know how busy it is because we're so busy. So even just
you can impart it in that time. That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people that I talk to about mindfulness, they say, well, I just can't do it. They can't ever take that step back in the moment. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, is that over time, if you practice it, not in that moment, if you set out a specific 10 minutes at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., when it's not at all relevant to your anxiety,
right,
you're actually practicing and building that habit, then at 3 p.m. when something triggers you, you will be able to call upon it.
Exactly right. You're building the witness quality of the mind through the practice, which you can call upon when you notice thoughts starting to take you away. So practice is critical, just like any good habit that we want to build into our healthy lifestyle. And this is a habit that's helping with rewiring the brain. We now know that we rewire the brain through mindful exercises. Another one is yoga, highly powerful for post-traumatic stress disorder. It basically, again, is building resilience through the mind-to-body connection. Because the more we reconnect mind to body, the less we're in those thoughts and allowing those thoughts to spin us off somewhere. And the other thing about it is that it helps with inflammation and helps lower general cortisol levels. Anything that can lower cortisol helps keep our stressors down, because stress is a big trigger for anxiety and depression. So we've got to work with that. Hypnosis has had a lot of success as well, especially with phobias. So this isn't like the flash in the pan, Vegas hypnosis act that you've seen. This is done by a registered psychotherapist who's had training and certification in hypnosis that basically is helping plant through neuro-linguistic programming into the subconscious part of the brain a preferred outcome. Basically, it's helping us give us post-hypnotic suggestions. So it's not just while we're under the state of hypnosis, the therapist is planting, instead of being afraid to go on an airplane, your next airplane flight is going to feel calm and peaceful. And that suggestion getting planted deep into the limbic and reticular parts of the brain can override the fear center memory loop that was planted earlier from something in our life.
Hey, Kirk, one way I've heard about this, and I'd love for you to elaborate on it, is if you think about some dry earth and you trickle water on it, eventually it'll create grooves.
Yes.
And then over time, those grooves are just going to keep deepening, right? The water's not going to follow some new path. And that's like our thought process. Over time, we just keep digging these grooves deeper and deeper. And so some of these treatment plans are literally to go in and wipe that slate clean and get rid of those grooves and allow you to form a new thought process.
Yes, and then the practice of habituating a new process, it becomes the new go-to rather than the old one, which created fear and contraction and behavioral issues.
Yeah, so that analogy really
It's a great analogy.
Yeah, because that makes sense. If you're practicing takes effort, right? Just as it would take effort to redirect water. Yeah. So you're proactively moving that groove or creating a new productive groove.
Absolutely. Positive thinking, gratitude, these are all parts of positive psychology now. Positive psychology, we've realized through, PET scans and functional MRI scans that we were trying to treat everything that was negative by watching what was going on in the brain. Now we're taking the opposite approach. Like you're saying, Alex, we're practicing these new techniques so that we're habituating, because right now, 47% of all of our thoughts are habit. So we might as well create, of that 47%, some new habits that put us into the positive mood, atmosphere, attitude that helps us have more resilience in life. That's part of it. And then the other part of it is being present in the moment as much as possible. So we want to build positive attitude, and we can do that with neurotransmitter balance. And we also want to be practicing being as present as possible with what is arising. It may be uncomfortable, but we just stay with it rather than having it become a trigger that launches us off into a series of thoughts and emotions and behaviors that make our life more difficult. Another one is biofeedback, and HeartMath is a great company where you can buy a little gadget that is monitoring your stress and monitoring what you think and breathe, and visually you can start to see your heartbeat change. So there's a variety of different biofeedback tools out there that help with depression and anxiety when we kind of get out of ourselves, out of our body-mind connection. So it's basically a gadget that monitors thought and body sensation, breath, or heartbeat to help you pull them back into alignment. I can't tell you enough how regular exercise and regular deep sleep and good clean diet and avoiding a lot of stimulants is also super important. And especially right now during this period of general anxiety that we're in with the COVID pandemic. We need to take care of ourselves, body, mind, soul, all of it. So every good habit that you can do in your lifestyle to get good, healthy minerals and vitamins, well-balanced food, feed your gut flora. This is so important because our mood-enhancing neurotransmitter serotonin is actually made from fiber in our guts. And the serotonin travels up the vagus nerve from our intestines all the way up to the brain. And then it gets released when we need it. But if we're not eating fiber, we don't even produce enough serotonin. This is how intrinsically we're connected between body and mind. Most of us struggle when we're having difficult thoughts and emotions, when we're in periods of anxiety or depression with sleep. And it becomes a catch-22. Our sleep gets bad, and then our anxiety and depressive thoughts get worse, and it can really spiral out of control. So everything you can do to anchor into set bedtimes and try to go to bed as early as possible. It's that beginning period of the night that lowers inflammation, that helps with the body repair and recycling. All the immune function is going on then. And then it's the later night towards the morning that's all about helping the brain move memories and bathe it and clean it. Sleep is so important for our mental health. Then I want to talk about a couple of other therapies. One's called EMDR. So it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. This is a tool that's been used with skilled trained psychotherapists, especially again with things like post-traumatic stress disorder, where you help take somebody close to a memory of a trauma, but you have their eyes track movement. And what happens in the memory system of the brain is when the eyes are moving and the memory's coming up, there's an opportunity for the intensity of the memory to be dissipated. And this has worked really well with post-traumatic stress disorder. It can also work with older trauma from our other periods of our life. Repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is the new phase from electric convulsive shock therapy from the 50s and 60s. It's still being used for certain psychotic conditions now, but it's a wand basically with a head that has a magnetic pulsing going through it, and the practitioner holds it at different parts of the head where it wants to activate the neuron connection in the different centers of the brain. It's non-invasive, it doesn't hurt, there's no pain. And it, again, working in alignment with potentially therapy or medications or meditation or any of these other choices, can also help certain people. The studies on both of these tools have been very beneficial for certain people. Not everybody, but neither is medications always good for everybody. Also wanted to mention that there's certain anxiety supporting apps. Calm, which is a guided meditation app, is great for helping reduce the busyness and the types of thoughts we're having by giving us a focused direction to follow. So guided meditations, we're following an auditory or a visual trajectory, and it takes us away from just the discursive thoughts that we're just pumping out through our mind. Colorphy is a practice where you're actually coloring in, and you don't have to worry about coloring out of the lines. It'll make sure it stays in different mandalas. And what these kinds of apps do, these kind of creative activity apps, is it puts us in a flow state. When we're in a flow state of activity, it could be playing a musical instrument or making a beautiful creative dinner, or it could be rock climbing. But anytime you can put yourself into a flow state, you are not thinking. You're what Alex would have described being in the exact present moment. And those moments go from one moment to the next moment to the next moment because you're so highly focused on what you're doing. And if we can incorporate creative activities in our life that we lose ourselves in, and we lose time, we actually trigger different areas of the prefrontal cortex and that stimulate joy and peace. So flow state's very important for mental and emotional health as well. DARE is an anxiety focused app with guided people in it that are basically kind of like the cognitive behavioral therapy, helping walk you through towards your fear and then pulling you away so that you can get closer and accept it more and more, rather than having it somewhere hidden over in our brain and it just kind of runs amok. So it kind of works hand in hand with cognitive behavioral therapy. And then lastly, I'd recommend breath work, which is as a curated selection of different breathing techniques that can take you into sleep states or deep relaxation states, or even give you energy. If you're in a depressed state and you're having a hard time getting up in the morning, you could do some breath work that actually stimulates us and gets the energy going so that we get up and get going into our day rather than kind of dropping and sinking. So that's 4 apps that you might want to look in to add it to your tool bag. Again, it is all about tool bags. It's about having as many positive resilience building resources that we can have in our life as possible to manage the stimulation that could take us towards places in our past that we've that can lead us into certain thoughts and feeling patterns, or situations now like the COVID situation that can spin us off. The other thing is that we do have to watch what we do with how we feed our mind. So like positive psychology, the more gratitude, appreciation, social connection, sense of purpose that we build in our life, the more we have resilience. The more we're watching the news continuously and being buffeted by the world's events, the less we have, you could say, ballast to just be with ourselves. We get blown by what's going on around us, by the news media or by the social media. And these things can actually drain a lot of energy for us and take us down the wrong path. So limiting the amount of news, and sometimes even social media, limiting stimulants, especially things like caffeine, which up cortisol and affected different neurotransmitters, is definitely important. And if you're into the side where anxiety has moved into depression, alcohol is probably not a good idea, because those two things, alcohol is a depressant. So just monitoring the stimulants in your life is as important as resourcing yourself. So that's a lot of information. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to help with anything you have bubbling up.
I'd personally like to second what you mentioned about social media. I know personally that when I start to scroll through my feed, all it does is take me out of the moment. All it does is have me think, oh, my friends are doing this, or they've bought that, or they're on this experience, or I follow people who I don't even know, and they're doing these amazing things. And all I can think is, well, why don't I have that? Why aren't I there yet? So I'm holding my happiness hostage for some future version of myself. And that's not fair. So I personally want to second what you said about social media. News is similar, but social media for me specifically takes me out of the moment like no other.
Mm-hmm. And news once a day isn't a bad thing, so that we can sort of contextualize what's going on in our world and hold a sense of thread to what's going on. But if we're watching the news in the bank, and then we're watching the news at the kitchen, and we're watching the news in the rec room, and it's just constantly all around us, again, we're not in the moment, and we're being spun by other people's thoughts rather than being just present with our own self. And practicing being present with our own selves is ultimately the cure. Like the Dalai Lama says, instead of focusing on the negative, focus on being happy. I mean, build that 47% of the habitual thinking in your mind on the spectrum that's about the positive, the glass half full, the gratitude, the appreciation, the joy, the peace, the serenity, the connection. These are the things that give us, well, I'll tell you straight up, a longer life. Absolutely a longer life. 2 times more chance of dying earlier when we're focusing on the negative.
Hey, Kirk. So, follow-up question to what you were talking about, our gut health and how it affects our anxiety levels or our happiness. You specifically said serotonin, which I think it is so true because I know that when I get anxious, I feel it in my stomach.
Yep.
We had a pretty good talk last or 2 weeks ago with Jen. So there's a lot of materials now on our website about eating well, she specifically said a varied diet. So making sure you're taking in lots of different nutrients. That's a very holistic look at it. Speaking from supplements, do you know of any off the top of your head that might be beneficial for anxiety?
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because the naturopathic health world, which is the European medical model that's centuries old, and it comes from herbalism and basically before the pharmaceutical industry started after World War I, it was all herbal. The whole world was on herbal. And different plants have different phytonutrients, as we know from Jen, but they also have different qualities that affect our neurotransmitters in our brain. You might have tried chamomile tea or valerian tea for times when you feel anxious. And those can be slightly sedative and relaxing. Same with St. John's wort. Tinctures of St. John's wort can definitely help with anxiety. It's been used for centuries. These are things that you could check in with a naturopathic doctor. And I would highly recommend having a naturopathic doctor help you do a hormonal test to find out how is your cortisol doing. Is it in the wrong times of the day, or is it elevated continuously through the day? Because if it is, you're going to be running in a sympathetic nervous system constantly. You're basically in a fight, flight, and freeze system all day long. And then you can also have some support from a naturopathic doctor about specific supplements for you, your body type, your age, your hormonal balance. Think individual. Don't just think, oh, I saw an ad for this and I'm going to go get it. It's going to work for me. Get some professional help, both from your naturopathic doctor or your medical doctor around some of the supplements that can support either medications or therapy or some of these other modalities we talked about. Any other questions or feedback?
Kirk, you mentioned breath work, and something that I'm starting to dabble in is the Wim Hof method. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Is that the type of breath work that you would recommend, or is there something different?
Well, Wim Hof, for those of you who don't know him, he's the Dutch fellow that started a practice which he borrowed many techniques from different cultures from, including breath work and meditation focuses, to supercharge the body with oxygen and actually increase the internal heat in the body so that then the body can go into a cold immersion. So all of the cold immersion stuff that's kind of recent in the last 5 years has basically come from Wim Hof. And he's taken breath work from the yogic Vedantic tradition. He's taken things from some of the monks in Japan who run 52 miles in a day in sandals, all kinds of esoteric breathing and focusing tools, so that basically we can be in a discomforting situation like an ice bath and be with it, because we've preheated our body, we've oxygenated our blood, and then we've worked with how our mind works with just sensation. And those kinds of things can be super powerful for building, again, resilience for the mind body. And you want to start off slow. And it's also very good for inflammation. So that cold bath that we always ask you guys to do at the hot springs in British Columbia, or into our cold plunge by the hot tub, those are really good for circulation and inflammation. And so the practice that you're talking about, Alex, can be very helpful. Healthful and helpful. Again, you don't want to just, as a novelty, go and immerse yourself into a bathtub full of ice cubes without doing some practice and learning and starting off slow, like maybe just finishing your shower cold, and then you get more and more used to it, and then you can experiment more. I actually watched the movie Atomic Blonde a couple of weeks ago for fun, and the actress, I forget her name in it, but she's in cold immersion, ice cube baths several times in the movie. Made me think of that.
Would there aren't any other questions. If anyone has any questions, and either interject now or put it in the chat, you can do it direct to me if you want it anonymous, and I'll get them asked to Kirkland. Kirk,
sorry, Alex.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that I'm available Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays for half-hour free chat. If you haven't taken me up on that, I'm happy to talk about anything in the spectrum of health from the mountain trek perspective. Troubleshoot anything that you're bumping up against as obstacles in your life right now. I'm a certified coach, and I'm getting certified as a relational somatic therapist. So don't feel you have to have some kind of disorder to talk to me. We can just talk about what it's like to be working from home.
I just put that into the chat for everyone. There's a link to put some time on Kirkland's calendar. Well, Kirk, we're just at time. Something that I wanted to ask you, but I will hold off because I think what you said about it being very personalized is true. And the question I wanted to ask you was, if you were to have an anxiety attack or a few, or it became an issue, what would be your plan? But I think the reason I don't think you should answer that is because exactly what you said before, which is it's so personal.
Well,
So
I would tell you what I would do is I would go to seek some professional advice, because, talking to my doctor, he might ask me questions about my family history, so I can get a sense of whether there's something genetic happening. Or I might go see my psychotherapist, and at Mount Trek, we believe in psychotherapy because it's a way to learn about our past and what's in our subconscious. And I might just go to my psychotherapist and talk about an event that happened. And then through that therapy session, get in touch with how that event might be connected to something else that I wasn't paying attention to. So I definitely would recommend not suffering. I would highly recommend to all of humanity, if you're feeling like your life is getting smaller, or you're feeling like your thoughts are getting the better of you, it's worth going to talk to your medical doctor or your professional psychotherapist, and then start on the road of exploration. Because all of these spectrum of anxiousness, or in the worst case, disorders, when they're debilitating our life for a period of time, can be treated. They can be treated, both personally by things we do and not do in our life, but also with some professional help. So that would be my answer, Alex. And then each of us will have a different route that we take for treatment and support.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks everyone for joining us. It was
take good care, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
be
you
back
so
in
much.
2 weeks. Topic TBD, but keep your eye on the emails. If you have a topic in mind, please email.
Yes, open to suggestions.
Great.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Be well.